The record began with a sound. Not an explosion, not a declaration of war, not the collapse of a fleet or the silencing of a diplomatic channel. Just a sound, a low, rhythmic clicking that the Council's acoustic analysts spent 3 days trying to classify before someone thought to ask what it actually was. Knuckles, human knuckles, rapping against a table. The human delegate had been tapping them for 11 minutes while the vote was read aloud. Not nervously, not impatiently, steadily, like a metronome counting down to something the rest of the chamber hadn't yet realized was coming. Nobody in the hall understood why that detail ended up in every subsequent report filed about that session. It seemed irrelevant. It seemed like noise. It wasn't. The Galactic Council's chamber of final consensus occupied a station the size of a small moon, positioned at the gravitational center of the Orindel Nebula, a location chosen specifically because it belonged to no single civilization. Neutral ground, sacred ground, in the way that bureaucracies make things sacred, through paperwork and precedent and the accumulated weight of 600 years of decisions made inside the same walls. 41 species held voting seats. Humanity had held an observer seat for 19 years, permitted to speak, never permitted to vote, permitted to petition, never permitted to veto. The distinction had seemed generous at the time of Earth's admission. It seemed less generous now. Ambassador Yale Doran stood at the petitioner's lectern, a raised circular platform at the center of the chamber floor, positioned so that every voting species could look down at whoever stood there. The geometry was intentional. It had always been intentional. She was not tapping her knuckles anymore. She had stopped the moment the vote tally appeared on the central display. 38 in favor, 2 abstentions, 1 vote against. The 1 vote against had been cast by the human observer's seat. An observer's vote carried no legal weight under Council charter. Everyone in the chamber understood this, including Yale Doran. The presiding voice, a tall, silver-carapaced Velthani named Orvash 7, allowed a 3-second pause before speaking, which was the Council's customary gesture of respect for losing parties. "The motion carries," Orvash 7 said. "The human territorial designation is hereby suspended. Earth and its affiliated stations are removed from Council protection. A period of 60 standard cycles will be granted for voluntary withdrawal from Council-adjacent space." 60 standard cycles, approximately 72 hours by human reckoning. Yale Doran said nothing for a long moment. "Then 60 cycles." "Correct. Not 61. Orvash 7's carapace shifted in a way that translated, roughly, to impatience. "Ambassador, the terms are as stated." "I understand the terms," Yale said. Her voice was level in a way that several delegates would later describe in their reports as *unsettling*, though none of them could immediately explain why. "I'm confirming them. 60 cycles, beginning now. Beginning at the conclusion of this session." "When does this session conclude?" A pause. "It concludes when the presiding chair declares it concluded." Yale Doran picked up the small object she had placed on the lectern when she'd first taken her position, a habit her staff had always found odd. It was a watch. An old one, mechanical, analog, the kind with a face and hands that moved visibly. She looked at it once briefly, in a way that made it appear she was not looking at the vote result on the display at all. "Then I request the session be concluded," she said, "immediately." The chamber went very quiet. Orvash 7 declared the session concluded. Yale Doran walked out. Her knuckles never touched the table again. But 3 hours later, when the first reports started arriving at the Council's emergency communication array, several delegates would find themselves thinking about that sound. That 11 minutes of steady, rhythmic tapping, counting something down. What had she been counting? The answer, as it turned out, had been sitting in the Council's own archives for 11 years. It had been submitted, reviewed, catalogued, and filed under a classification heading that translated from Velthani administrative language as asterisk theoretical concerns non-urgent asterisk. The document was 40 pages long. It had been read in full by exactly one council analyst, who had written a two-sentence summary calling it asterisk speculative and asterisk culturally specific in a way that limits broader application. Nobody had read it again until the morning after the exile vote, when a junior Velthani communications officer named Selthira pulled it from the archive, because she was trying to understand something she had witnessed during the session. She had been staffing the acoustic monitoring system. It was her job to flag any unusual sounds in the chamber, a standard security protocol, mostly theoretical, never triggered in the 11 years she'd held the posting. She had flagged the knuckle tapping. Her supervisor had overridden the flag. Now, 12 hours after the vote, she was reading the document that humans had submitted 11 years ago and wondering why no one had taken it seriously. It was titled, in human English with a council translation attached, a formal notice of human strategic doctrine and the conditions under which it activates. The two-sentence summary had called it speculative. Selthira, reading it now, did not think it was speculative. She thought it was a warning. She thought, with a cold that had nothing to do with the station's climate systems, that the 60-cycle withdrawal period had not been granted to the humans. She thought, and she would spend the rest of her life turning this thought over, examining it from every angle, that Yale Doran had confirmed the 60 cycles because 60 cycles was already the number she had. 14 hours after the exile vote, the first anomaly reached the Council's monitoring network. It came from Relay Station Duvanthi 9, a human-operated communications hub positioned along the outer edge of what had been, until yesterday, Council-adjacent human space. Duvanthi 9 was one of 47 human relay stations that the Council had assumed would need to be vacated as part of the withdrawal process. It was, by any military or strategic analysis, a minor installation, a communications node, minimally staffed, lightly equipped. The anomaly was not an attack, it was a silence. Duvanthi 9 simply stopped transmitting. This was not in itself alarming. Stations sometimes lost power, equipment sometimes failed. The Council's monitoring officer filed it as a technical interruption and moved on. Then Relay Station Karath 12 went silent. Then Monitoring Array Pelin 7. Then, over the following 40 minutes, 11 more human installations along a 3,000 light-minute arc of space simply ceased to transmit, not destroyed, not evacuated, just silent. Dark, as if someone had methodically switched off a string of lights working inward from the edge. The Council monitoring officer escalated the report. By the time it reached Orvash 7's desk, 22 installations had gone dark. The arc of silence was not random. It was a line, a very deliberate, very precise line drawn through a specific region of space that the Council's tactical advisors, looking at it now with fresh and suddenly uncomfortable attention, recognized as the outer boundary of the relay network that provided communication coverage for 4 of the Council's major shipping corridors. "What are they doing?" Orvash 7 asked. The tactical advisor, a Grecian named Uvorthy, who had spent 40 years analyzing military configurations and had never once found humans genuinely threatening, studied the map for a long moment. "I don't know," Uvorthy said. "It looks like they're withdrawing." "Are they withdrawing?" "Yes, but the asterisk order in which they're withdrawing," he stopped. "Uvorthy, they're not evacuating the stations. They're not destroying them either. They're just deactivating them, in a sequence that leaves the network in a specific configuration." "What configuration?" Uvorthy looked at the map for another moment. "I need more time." "You have until the anomaly list grows again." The anomaly list grew 7 minutes later. 3 more stations. The line in space grew longer. The configuration became clearer, though clearer asterisk was not the right word, because clarity implied understanding, and what Uvorthy was looking at did not feel like something he understood. It felt like something he was only beginning to realize he didn't understand. Selthira had been trying to reach her supervisor for 2 hours. He was not responding. This was, under normal circumstances, unusual. Under current circumstances, she suspected he was simply overwhelmed, because the emergency communications queue had begun logging requests at a rate that the system was not designed to process, and the vast majority of them were coming from human-adjacent space. She went back to the document, a formal notice of human strategic doctrine and the conditions under which it activates. She read Section 3 again, slowly. The section was titled, in the human translation, On the Nature of Human Response to Existential Exclusion. The text read, in part, "It is a documented feature of human cognitive and social architecture that the removal of institutional protection does not produce compliance behavior in the manner that such removal produces compliance in most observed species. In most species, the loss of protective affiliation triggers risk reduction behavior, withdrawal, de-escalation, accommodation. In humans, the removal of protective affiliation has historically triggered a categorically different response, which human scholars refer to by several names, the most precise translation of which is the removal of the reason not to." Selthira read that line 3 times. The removal of the reason not to. She turned to Section 5, which contained the part that the original analyst's 2-sentence summary had dismissed as asterisk culturally specific. Section 5 was a list, a very long list historically documented, of situations in which humans had been excluded, isolated, cornered, or stripped of institutional recourse, and what they had done in response. The list went back a very long time. She was still reading when the 4th anomaly report came in. This one was different from the previous 3. This one wasn't a station going dark. This one was a station coming on. The station that activated was not on any council registry. It was not on any human registry either, technically, because it predated the registration requirement that had been imposed on human installations after Earth's observer admission. It was old, older than the Council's relationship with humanity. It had been built at a time when humans were still deciding whether to answer the Council's initial contact signal at all. It was broadcasting on a frequency that hadn't been used in active communications in 30 years. But every species in the Council recognized the frequency. They recognized it the way you recognize a sound you've only ever heard in old recordings, the sound of something that was supposed to be historical. It was a war preparation frequency, not a weapons lock, not an attack signal, just a declaration, broad spectrum, undeniable, we are preparing. "That's not possible," Uvorthy said. His voice had changed. Selthira, listening from her station, noticed it immediately. 40 years of tactical analysis and his voice had never sounded like that during a briefing. "That installation hasn't been active in 31 years, said the signal analyst beside him. "It went dormant after the Orindal Accords. Why is it active now?" Nobody answered. Nobody had an answer, and the silence in the tactical room lasted long enough to become its own kind of answer, the kind that meant we didn't prepare for this. What they didn't say, because saying it would have required admitting that they should have seen it coming, was this: the installation had not simply reactivated asterisk. The signal analysis showed it had been kept in a state of continuous readiness for 31 years. Low power, minimal emission, invisible to passive monitoring, but running, maintained, staffed probably, though no one had thought to check because no one had thought it mattered. Someone had always thought it might matter. "Get me the ambassador," Orvash 7 said. "She's not responding to council channels." "Get me anyone from the human delegation." There is no human delegation. They left the station 4 hours ago. A pause that lasted, by later accounts, approximately 8 seconds. 8 seconds of the presiding voice of the Galactic Council standing completely still in the tactical center, while the map in front of him showed 27 dark stations, one ancient broadcasting installation running on war prep frequency, and a pattern of deactivations that his best analysts still couldn't fully interpret. 8 seconds. What did we do? Orvash 7 said. It was not a rhetorical question, but no one in the room had an answer yet, so it sat in the air like an unfinished sentence, and the map kept changing, and Celthera, in the monitoring station down the corridor, read Section 5 of the document that no one had taken seriously, and her hands were very cold. Here is what the Council did not know at hour 14. They did not know that Yale Doran had not slept in 31 hours. They did not know this because the assumption, consistent across 40 of the 41 Council species, was that biological limitations would constrain human response time. Sleep requirements, metabolic recovery, the organic delays that even the most capable biological species needed to account for in crisis planning. They did not know that Yale Doran had spent 19 years on that station, in that observer's seat, in that chamber with its deliberately elevated viewing tiers, and its petitioner's lectern designed to make whoever stood there feel small. They did not know what 19 years of that did to a human. They did not know, specifically, that she had spent the last 6 of those years preparing for the vote that had just taken place. Not hoping it wouldn't happen, preparing for it to happen. "Tell me the relay network is holding," she said. She was aboard a human diplomatic transport, moving at a speed that was, technically, within the limits the Council had set for vessels in withdrawal transit. Technically, the margin was approximately 0.3%. "Network's holding," said her comms officer, a young man named Deitch who had the particular skill of sounding calm regardless of what the screens in front of him were showing. 17 stations dark on the outer arc. The Council's monitoring network just logged our broadcast from Waypoint Actual. Response: "They tried to reach you." "I know. Ambassador. How long until Kareth Relay picks up the second phase signal?" Deitch checked his board. 40 minutes. Good. She looked at the watch on her wrist. Not at the time. At the mechanism, the small visible turning of gears beneath the crystal face, the way the second hand moved in its precise, indifferent arc. Then we have 40 minutes to look like we're still making decisions. Are we not making decisions? We made all the decisions 6 years ago, she said. Right now we're just executing them. Daichai was quiet for a moment. Then, they're going to figure out what the network configuration means. Eventually. When they do. When they do, Yale said, they will call us. She did not sound afraid. She did not sound angry either, which was, in some ways, more unsettling to Daichai than anger would have been. She sounded the way she had sounded during the vote level, precise, present in a way that implied she was tracking something other people weren't tracking yet. He went back to his board. The second phase signal was 40 minutes out. Uvorthy had the pattern. He had spent 3 hours staring at the map of deactivated human stations, trying to understand what configuration they created, and he had it now, not completely, not in every detail, but enough. Enough to feel something he had not felt in 40 years of tactical analysis. Not quite fear, something adjacent to it. He called it professional vertigo, later, when he wrote his account. The sensation of realizing that the problem you've been analyzing is not the problem, that the problem you've been analyzing is a component of a much larger problem, and that you have spent 3 hours solving the wrong equation. The deactivated stations weren't a retreat pattern. They were a switch. Specifically, they were the manual override configuration for the Council's own relay network, a sequence of deactivations that, if completed, would redirect the signal routing of 4 major shipping corridors through a single choke point. A choke point that was, at this moment, occupied by a human installation. Not a weapons platform, not a military vessel, a communications hub, but communications in a civilization that conducted trade across hundreds of light years of space were not abstract. Communications were the nervous system. Cut it wrong and the paralysis was immediate. And humans, specifically, had spent 19 years watching how the Council's communications network functioned. Watching, and apparently understanding. They didn't just know where our network was vulnerable, Uvorthy said. He was sitting down. Which was unusual. He had spent 40 years doing his most important thinking on his feet. They've been holding it for years. This configuration if they complete it. Will they complete it? Orvash 7 asked. They already can. They could complete it right now. They haven't, he paused. They're waiting. For what? I think, Uvorthy said, and this was the moment his voice finally found something that was not professional detachment, something raw and reluctant and almost awed. I think they're waiting for us to understand what we're looking at. The room was silent. They want us to see it, he said, before they do anything with it. They want us to know that we're looking at a completed trap and that they built it while we were handing them observer status and not letting them vote. Orvash 7 stood with that for a moment. Outside the station's viewports, the Orindal Nebula blazed in colors that had made this location seem grand and appropriate for centuries. It looked the same as it always had. Nothing in the physical universe had changed. 19 years, Orvash 7 said. At minimum, Uvorthy said. The dormant installation has been maintained for 31. A longer silence. Get me Ambassador Doran, Orvash 7 said. Sir, she's not. I don't care what channel. Get me anyone. Get me a human. Get me anyone who can receive a message and relay it. They found Decha. The call came through 42 minutes after the second phase signal broadcast, almost exactly when Yale had said it would. Dechai patched it through with a look on his face that was not quite surprise. He had believed her, intellectually, but was the expression of a person whose intellectual belief has just become visceral reality. Ambassador Doran, Orvash 7's voice said. The translator rendered it in English with the flat accuracy the Council's systems had always provided. But there was something in the underlying audio, some frequency in the original Velthani phonation, that the translation couldn't fully flatten. We are requesting a channel. You have one, Yale said. A pause. We would like to discuss the withdrawal timeline. The withdrawal timeline is 60 standard cycles, Yale said, as stated. Another pause, longer. We would like to discuss a modification. To the 60 cycles. To the terms of the exile order. Yale looked at the watch. The second hand moved. She let it move for a full rotation before she spoke. Presiding voice, she said. I want to be precise with you because I think precision is important right now. Are you asking to renegotiate the terms of our exile, or are you asking to rescind it? The pause that followed was the longest yet. 7 seconds. 8. In the background of the channel, she could hear other voices, other species, arguing in their own languages, feeding options to Orvash 7 that the translator was catching fragments of. Can't rescind, sets precedent, tell them partial restoration. The network configuration needs if they complete the switch. We are asking, Orvash 7 said finally, to rescind. Yale Doran exhaled once through her nose. It was not a sigh. It was something smaller and more controlled, the sound of a person releasing a very specific tension that they have been holding for a very long time. All right, she said, here are our terms. She talked for 22 minutes. Dechai sat at his board and monitored the channel and watched the ambassador work, and he thought, not for the first time, that there was something deeply strange about watching Yale Doran do what she did, not frightening, exactly, not triumphant, but strange, in the way that watching any person do something they have spent decades becoming precisely good at is strange. The gap between effort and result disappears. It looks effortless. It looks inevitable. It wasn't effortless. He knew that. He had watched her spend 6 years building the thing she was now calmly describing to the presiding voice of the Galactic Council. 6 years of maintenance budgets disguised as communications infrastructure upgrades. 6 years of staff rotations at Waypoint Actual that looked like routine personnel management. 6 years of keeping the old installation running on minimal power, under passive emissions, invisible to a monitoring network that no one had thought to aim at a dormant human installation, because dormant human installations were not considered worth monitoring. 6 years, and before that 19 years of observation, of watching, of learning in extraordinary detail how the thing that was now under pressure actually worked. The Council had looked down from elevated viewing tiers for 19 years. Humans had been taking notes. The terms Yale was describing were not punitive. This was the part that would take the Council the longest to process, that the terms were not designed to wound or humiliate or extract maximum concession from a weakened opponent. They were designed to produce a specific outcome: full voting membership, treaty-level infrastructure rights, and a formal revision of the charter language that had created the observer designation in the first place. The designation that had made all of this possible by ensuring that for 19 years, no one took humanity seriously enough to check what they were quietly building. She wasn't trying to punish the Council for the exile vote. She was trying to make sure there was never another one. "You understand," Orvash 7 said when she finished, "that the Council will need to convene a full session to approve these terms." "I understand," Yale said. "The 60-cycle clock is still running." A pause. "We can convene within 12 cycles. Then convene within 12 cycles." Another pause, shorter. "Ambassador, the network configuration will remain static until the vote is concluded," Yale said. "You have my word." "And if the vote does not pass?" The question hung on the channel. In the tactical center of the Council station, Uvorthy was watching his map. The deactivated stations were still dark. The old installation was still broadcasting on warprep frequency. The configuration that could redirect 4 shipping corridors through a human choke point was still, as of this moment, incomplete. "Still, presiding voice," Yale said, "you've had my document for 11 years. Section 7. A very long pause. Section 7 was titled, in the human translation, "On the human concept of having nothing left to lose, and why rational actors should consider it carefully before manufacturing the condition." The vote took 9 cycles. 9 cycles, not 12, a fact that Celthera noted in her personal record of events, because the reduction in timeline was its own kind of data. The Council could move quickly when it understood what was at stake. It had simply, for 19 years, not understood what was at stake. 39 in favor, 1 abstention, 1 against. The 1 against was a species called the Durvathi, who had been the architects of the original observer status language, and who would spend the next decade quietly and unsuccessfully trying to have the vote declared procedurally invalid. They would fail. The precedent was set. It would not be unset. The 2 abstentions from the original exile vote had become 1. Celthera noted that too. When the result came through, Daichai read it from his board and said, "That's it." Yale was looking out the transport's viewport at a section of space that contained nothing spectacular. No nebula, no dramatic stellar formation, just the ordinary dark between stars, which was most of space, most of the time. She had been looking at it for a while. "Signal waypoint actual," she said. "Stand down warprep broadcast. Maintain dormancy protocol." "Standing down." "Signal all outer arc stations. Reactivation sequence, standard order. Understood. Daichi worked his board for a moment. The lights in the map one by one began to come back on. Ambassador. Yes. The Council's tactical advisor, Uvorthy. He filed a request. Formal inquiry into the construction timeline of Waypoint Actual. I know. How do you want to respond? Yale turned from the viewport. She looked, for the first time in a long time, tired, not broken, not defeated, but the specific tiredness of someone who has been running on something other than rest for an extended period, and has only now, in this moment, allowed themselves to feel the accumulated weight of that. Respond with the construction permits, she said. All of them. Everything is in the public record. It's been in the public record for 31 years. Daichi stared at her. They could have found all of this on their own. Yes. They never looked. No, she picked up the watch from where she had set it on the console. The mechanism ticked on. Indifferent to votes and exile orders and war prep frequencies, and 31 years of quiet maintenance on an installation that everyone had decided not to worry about. They never looked because they never thought they needed to. What made you think they would vote to exile us? They didn't need to vote to exile us, she said. Eventually they were always going to. The observer designation was always a waiting room. The question was never of Ustarusk. The question was Ustarusk 1, and whether we'd be ready. She stood. She was going to sleep for a while. She had earned it, and the transport had a long flight back to Council Station, where 41 species were currently in the process of updating their models of what humanity was. Ducha. Ambassador. The 11 minutes before the vote, she paused. You watched the recording. He hadn't mentioned it. He hadn't thought she knew. Yes. Did you understand what I was counting? He had thought about this. He had assumed she was counting down to something, to the vote result, to the exile declaration, to some internal threshold of patience or composure. He had assumed it was emotional, a way of managing the room, the moment, the weight of what was happening. No, he said, not exactly. Yuldurin looked at the watch one more time. Then she set it face down on the console and walked toward the door. I wasn't counting down, she said. I was counting how long it took them to stop watching me and start watching the vote display. 11 minutes. That's how long it took the chamber to forget I was there. She stopped in the doorway. That's the thing about being in the room but not being allowed to vote, she said. Eventually, everyone stops watching you, and then you can do anything. She left. The watch ticked on. Sulthara filed her report 6 hours after the rescission vote. It was 47 pages long. Her supervisor read all of it this time, and then he passed it up the chain without editing, which was unusual, and it kept moving up the chain in the same way, read completely, passed upward without summary or reduction, until it reached a level of the Council's administrative structure that almost never read 47-page reports from junior communications officers. They read it. The report's conclusion, which Sulthara had written and rewritten 4 times before settling on language she felt was accurate without being melodramatic, read as follows. The human strategy in the period following the exile vote was not improvised. It was not reactive. It was a prepared response to a situation that humanity had been anticipating in immaterial ways, constructing the conditions for, over a period of no less than 19 years and possibly 31. The critical error made by this council and its analytical divisions was not a failure of intelligence. The relevant information was available and submitted by humanity directly. The critical error was a failure of imagination. We did not consider, seriously and structurally, what humanity would do if excluded from the institutions we invited them to observe. We assumed that exclusion would produce the behavior it produces in every other species we have encountered: accommodation, de-escalation, compliance. It did not produce those behaviors. It produced the opposite. I would recommend that the Council revise its foundational assumptions about human behavioral response to institutional pressure. I would further recommend that the Council consider carefully what other dormant installations, maintained relay configurations, or prepared strategic frameworks humanity may have constructed during the 19 years we spent not watching. I do not know the answer to that question. I do not believe the Council knows the answer either. That in itself, I believe, is the point. In the months that followed, 3 separate Council intelligence divisions attempted to conduct a comprehensive audit of human infrastructure in and around Council-adjacent space. They found the construction permits for Waypoint Actual exactly as Yull had said they would. They found the maintenance logs. They found the personnel records. Everything was documented. Everything was legal. Everything had been sitting in the public record for decades. They also found 17 other installations that had been kept in similar states of low-power dormancy, spread across human space, none of them notable individually, all of them positioned in ways that, when mapped together, formed patterns that the analysts studied for a very long time without reaching conclusions they were comfortable putting in formal reports. None of the 17 were active. None of them were broadcasting. They were simply there, maintained, ready. Yavutha retired 18 months after the exile vote. He had spent 40 years analyzing military strategy across 41 civilizations, and he had never, in that time, encountered anything that matched what he'd spent those 9 cycles staring at in the Council's tactical center. Not the sophistication of it. There were older civilizations with more complex strategic architectures. Not the scale of it. Not the resources. What he could not stop thinking about, in the years after his retirement, was the patience. 31 years of maintaining an installation no one was watching. 19 years of sitting in a room where you could speak but not vote, watching and learning and building, because the alternative was accommodation, compliance, waiting for the institution to extend you full membership on its own timeline, which was an institution's timeline, which meant it might never happen at all. Humans had decided not to wait. They had decided, quietly and without announcement, to be ready instead. He wrote about this. He wrote about it at length, in a series of papers that were read widely among Council strategic analysts and debated with considerable heat, because the implication was one that many Council members found uncomfortable in ways they struggled to articulate precisely. The discomfort, he eventually decided, came from this. It was not that humans were more powerful than anyone had thought. They weren't particularly. The network configuration was a pressure point, not a weapon. Waypoint Actual was a signal installation, not a fleet. If the Council had called the bluff, if they had simply let the 60 cycles run and absorbed whatever disruption humanity could produce, the result would not have been catastrophic. Humanity had known this too. That was the thing. That was the part that kept Yavutha writing and revising and writing again, trying to find the right words for something that resisted exact language. Humanity had known that their position was not ultimately overwhelming. They had known that a sufficiently determined Council could have waited them out, and they had built their strategy not on being undefeatable, but on being unacceptable to fight, on making the cost of conflict, even a conflict the Council would probably win, high enough, complicated enough, sufficiently uncertain in its downstream effects, that the rational calculation always came out the same way. It's easier to give them the vote. It had always been easier to give them the vote. The trap was not the network configuration. The trap was not Waypoint Actual. The trap was the 19 years of demonstrated patience, of watching without complaining, of submitting documents that no one read and waiting with the particular quality of waiting that humans were apparently capable of, the kind that does not expire. The kind that does not give up and does not accommodate and does not, fundamentally, except that the waiting is permanent. The trap was making it Ustarusk Uzza to include them than to exclude them, and then waiting, with absolute certainty, for the moment when the Council would choose the harder path. They always did. And when they did, the thing that was waiting for them, quiet, maintained, staffed, 31 years dormant, came on. Not to destroy, just to remind them that it had always been there. Just to ask, how long did you think we would wait? Yuldurin served 3 more terms as ambassador before retiring to a small coastal city on Earth where the weather was cold most of the year, and the ocean was loud enough, most mornings, that you didn't need to think too hard about anything else. She kept the watch on the windowsill. Not on her wrist anymore. She didn't need to track anything. The thing she had been tracking for 31 years was finished. The goal was reached. The vote was cast, and this time it counted. She would read Yavada's papers. She would read Sulthara's report, which was eventually published in a translated edition that circulated widely among human strategic scholars. She would give exactly 1 interview. To a journalist who asked her the question that everyone asked, what would you have done if the rescission vote had failed? She thought about this for a long moment. Something else, she said finally. What does that mean? It means we would have done something else. She looked out the window at the ocean. The cold light moved on the water the way it always did, indifferent and beautiful. It means we weren't done. We were never going to be done. The vote failing would have been a new problem, and new problems get solved. She paused. That's all it ever was, a problem that needed solving. Do you think the council understands that now? She picked up the watch, not to check the time, just to hold it. The mechanism moved inside it, counting something that didn't need her attention anymore. I think, she said, that they understand that we are the species that will keep solving the problem. Long after solving it stops looking rational, long after it stops looking possible. She set it back on the sill. Whether they understand why is a different question. The journalist asked the why. Yale looked at the ocean. Because it's ours, she said. Because we built it and we earned it and it belongs to us, and we will spend however long it takes making sure the universe knows that. Not because we're the strongest, not because we're the oldest. She paused. Because we're the ones who will still be working on it after every other civilization has decided that it's too much effort and not worth the cost. She didn't say anything after that. The ocean was loud that morning. In 41 civilizations across the Council's territory, in tactical analysis rooms and intelligence archives and the carefully worded notes of strategic scholars, the question that had started with a sound, knuckles on a table, steady, rhythmic counting, was still being turned over, still being examined, still producing new and uncomfortable angles. Not what did humans do, but what else have they already built that we haven't found yet? What else is running, quiet, on minimum power, in a place no one thought to look, waiting for the moment it needs to come on? The second hand moved. The ocean moved. The galaxy, for the first time in 600 years of recorded council history, moved carefully around the small blue world at the edge of its maps. Not because humanity had conquered it, not because they had demanded it, but because the rational calculation, every single time, came out the same way. It is easier not to make them wait again.